In this lesson, we're going to be learning how to paint some florals, and we're going to be painting from some live flowers that I have here. And with it being springtime in Pennsylvania right now, this is a perfect time to do some floral watercolor paintings. So let's get started. Okay, so after you've gotten all of your supplies out, you have your two sources of your water, one for the dirty wash water, one for clean water to reconstitute the paints in your palette. Then you're going to get your brushes. I'm using the smaller brushes here, so I'm just using my two sizes of my round. So I'm using my 4 and my 6. And then I'm also using my number 3 rigger for fine line work. And then I also have my 1/4 inch flat that I'm going to be using for some leaves. So first, let's experiment with our brushes and let's find out exactly what kind of brush stroke you can make with each brush. So this is a number 4 round. So if I dip into my color and let's just experiment, you can kind of make kind of like a medium thick line, right? And then from that you can kind of spread out and use kind of the wider, you can kind of add some hard pressure and kind of make a wide leaf. And then if you want it to taper off at the end, you simply lighten your pressure and lift up on your brush. Okay, so this is kind of your all around just basic kind of leaf shape, right? Okay, so that is what the round can do. And obviously if you go to the number 6, it's just going to make a little bit bigger. Like that. Okay, now let's switch down to our, whoops, wrong one. Let's switch down to our rigger. So when we use the rigger, this is going to make very, very fine lines. Great line work for like vines or branches. So you can still use the rigger for some leaves though. If you want to do that, you would just load up your rigger brush. These are going to make some, it's going to make some long kind of spindly leaves. So to do the pine leaves, you're just going to kind of draw a branch, and then you're going to hold your brush kind of like you do like a pencil, okay? And it's a wrist movement. Okay? So it's like a flick. You're going to do grass in the same way when we get to landscapes here. Okay, like that. All right, so also with the rigger, you can do palm leaves. So if you're doing a beach scene and there's some sort of a palm frond, so again, you're gonna have your stem that comes down, right? Maybe let's just draw a little branch. Maybe it's branching off a little bit. Okay, and then you're going to use your rigger, but you're gonna kind of use medium pressure at the beginning, and then you're gonna taper it off. So, and then palm fronds are kind of, they're organized like in rows. So see how I'm using the side of the rigger and then I'm flicking it at the end. Okay. So then that creates a nice little kind of palm look. All right. Now, if you want to do broadleaves, switch down to your 1/4 inch flat. And I'm gonna make it wet, and we're gonna get some paint. Again, we're doing wet on dry. So that's wet paint on dry paper. Now for broadleaves, usually you have like a little stem, and you're going to use the width of the brush like so. Okay, do the other side. Okay, so you're using the wide part of the brush, you're pressing down, and then you're going to kind of bring that over a little bit and then flick with your wrist to make the taper at the end. Okay? And you have to rotate your paper around to be able to do the other side. Okay? Just like that. It creates kind of like a little broad shape, like a heart-shaped leaf. Okay? Okay. So now we're going to try to draw from, now that we've had some foliage practice, we're going to try to draw this blossom right here, okay? So this is, I think, a pansy. And notice, first we're going to observe, let's look at the structure of this flower. So see how there's these 3 petals here that are coming off from a yellow center. And then there's these 2 supporting petals back here. So that's 5 petals in total. Right? So I'm using a watercolor pencil because these lines will dissolve into the painting. So I'm using a watercolor pencil. And I'm just going to sketch the general shape of my flower. We're not going for realism here. This is a beginner level. So we're not going for hyperrealism. We're just going to kind of remember that pattern, the 3 petals here, and then the 2 supporting petals that are kind of overlapping in the back, and they're like slightly larger. Okay, so there, we have our little shape of our pansy kind of outlined on our paper. And we're gonna remember that the center is about right here, okay? So I'm gonna start with my number 6 round, and we're gonna do the wash layer first, okay? So the wash layer is going to be a wet and wet. So we're first going to wet our paper. Now remember that the water is going to act like a vehicle for the paint. So we want to make sure that there is, anywhere that there's water, there is opportunity for the paint to go there, okay? So this flower happens to be like a blue-purple color. So I'm going to mix in one of my mixing wells on my palette. I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue. I'm going to put that on my palette. Wash. And then I'm going to grab my clean water, and I'm going to go into this dark purple. I think this is azo purple. We're going to go into that, and we're going to mix up a nice dark purple color. Now remember that the wet paint is going to be a darker color than when it dries. So you always kind of want to start out a little darker than what you're hoping the color will dry to, okay? So we're going to start in the center because that's where the most concentrated color is. You can see that it's darker around this yellow center here, and then it kind of fades out as it goes out from the center. So we're gonna kind of start with our darkest color being around this center area. Push that paint around if it's not going where you want it to. Don't be afraid to push it around. Gonna get it all the way out to that edge. Okay, and you can see it's already kind of looking like our pansy, right? It's already kind of looking like our flower. Now, while it's wet, you're gonna rinse, dab, and then you're gonna pick up clean water. And we're gonna do that yellow center. So I'm going into my cadmium yellow, so that's the warm yellow. And I'm picking up some paint. And now what happens is when I add new paint, and this is the purple is already wet, the new paint is going to, with the new water, it's going to push everything out of the way. And that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to push that right into the center. Okay, and I'm just going to let it do its thing. So you can see already, see how the yellow is kind of expanding and it's pushing the purple out of the way. Okay, so that's exactly what we want. That's what we want to do. Okay, so I have dried mine with a hair dryer, or you can just let it air dry and it'll give you a little bit more of an effect, the bleeding effect. So, but I wanted mine to stop in its tracks, so I went ahead and fast dried it with a hair dryer. So you can see, look how light these colors dried, right? It was so dark when it was wet, and now it has dried. It's rather light. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the second part of our florals, which is we're going to use the glazing technique, and we're going to glaze over top of the wash layer, and that will create some detail. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to create this overlap of this petal here, and I want to darken this center in here. And if you look real close, I gotta kind of zoom in here. Do you see how there's like some veining happening with this dark purple coming out into the lighter purple of the petals? So we're gonna use the rigger and we're gonna pull out some wet paint and we're gonna create that veining that's around the flower there, okay? So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna kind of, because right now in the wash phase, it's all kind of like a blob, which is fine if you like the more abstract, look to your watercolors, that's fine. But if you want to add just a little bit more realism to your watercolors, we're going to add a glazing layer where we're going to kind of define these petals a little bit better, okay? So for this, I'm going to go to my number 4 round. And I'm gonna have to mix up some new paint because my paint is getting a little dry. So again, what did we do? We added the ultramarine blue. So take some of that, add it to your well, rinse, dab, pick up some clean water, and then we added a little bit of the azo purple. And we've mixed up our color, okay? So now I'm gonna look at my flower, and I do notice that I wanna define these petals that are around the center, the 3 petals that are kind of coming off of the yellow center. We'll worry about the 2 petals in the back in a second, but I want to redefine those because now it's kind of made it into a blob. So I'm just gonna glaze over top Okay, so now we have our pansy, and I've added some veining happening from the center. Okay, now I don't really love this hard edge that I've created. So what you can do is, even after it dries, you can still manipulate the paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my number 4 round, and I'm going to wet with clean water. And I'm going to kind of pull that color and I just want to soften that edge. It's a little too hard of an edge, so I just want to kind of soften it. So I'm kind of reconstituting that layer, and I'm just moving it around. Just kind of moving furniture. We're just kind of moving it around here. Now there is a hard edge on the edge of the petal, and I'm okay with that. So I'm kind of leaving that part. Then I wanted to soften that shadow there. And on the other side here, see the difference? Okay, so again, we're gonna do that on the other side. I'm gonna just rinse real quick and dab, and then I'm gonna clean it with a little bit of clean water, dab. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Whoops. Okay, now I'm pretty happy with the front 3 petals. So now I'm going to draw my attention to those 2 petals that are in the back there. So go ahead and rinse out. You're going to dab. I'm going to get some clean water here. Now I'm gonna just study this for a second. Okay, so what's going on? Well, there's a little shadow right here where this petal is overlapping this petal. Do you see that? The little shadow here. So we need to redefine that, because right now in my painting it's just sort of a blob. So that's where we're gonna start. We're gonna kind of redefine that there are in fact 2 petals in the back and not just one large petal. And then again, similar to the front petals, there's kind of a hard edge, or it's darker around the very edge of the petal, and then it kind of lightens as it goes into the center. So we're going to go back into the paint that we mixed up. And I just want to kind of redefine that. So good. So now just give that a second to kind of dry. And you can tell it's already starting to look a lot more like our pansy. So we're going to rinse. We're going to dab. Then I'm going to grab some clean water. And I don't want it dripping wet, but I do want it pretty wet. And then we're going to go into, let me see if I can zoom in just a little bit. Okay. So now that I've given that glaze layer a chance to dry, I'm just going to pull it. So this is clean water that I have on my brush, so no paint, but I'm just going to kind of reconstitute this, and I want to pull it down. So this whole edge, I just want to kind of pull this color out into here. I just want to soften that edge. I don't want it to be a hard edge. I want it to be just a soft transition. Okay. Do you see that? Cool, right? All right. Now the one last thing I want to do is I want to just kind of add a little bit of a shadow to show that there is an overlap happening with those petals. So I'm going to grab some paint, some fresh paint, and I just want to go in and I want to add a little bit of a shadow here. Okay. And there you go. You've painted a little pansy.